All right, on today's episode of Python Papi, we're back inside our smart contracts project. Let's have a look at what we're going to be going over today. Now, today we're back inside of our setup module, and we're going to be looking at functions slash methods. Now, the reason that is a slash here because this term can be interchangeable, so you can use either or. But today we're just going to be calling them functions. So functions are used to group code together and make it reusable in Python and Viper, and are used to group code together and make it reusable in our small contracts as well. We can define a function in Python like this. So you can see we have def, the keyword that we use to define our functions or start the definition. Then we have my function, which is going to be the name of our function, followed by our parameters. Now, parameters are optional, but we are going to be using them for this example. So we have parameter 1, which is going to be an integer, and parameter 2, which is going to be a string. You can see those are separated by a comma. And this function is going to return the string, and you can see here designated by the arrow pointing to the string keyword. Then we have our doc strings, which are also optional. This lets us know what the function is going to be doing. So this is a simple function that takes two parameters and returns a string. Then we have our return f string, which is hello, parameter 2, you pass the number 1. Now this returns a greeting with the parameters. Notice that we use type hints to indicate the types of the parameters and the return value of the function. Now this is a good practice to make the code more readable and understandable. We can call a function like this. So we have result equals my function, which is the name we gave our function. And you have 5 and Alice. This indicates the parameters that we want to pass into our function. Parameter 1, which is an int, you have 5. Parameter 2, which is a string, we have Alice. And we can also use a print statement to print the result of the function. So after we pass our parameters to our function and it's stored in the variable result, we can print the result variable, and it should print out the result of that should be, which is hello, Alice, you passed the number 5. And that's what happens after we pass our parameters into our function and we store it inside this variable. We call a variable which prints out the entire message for us. Now note, a function must always be defined with the def keyword, as I showed you up here with the def, followed by the name of the function, as you can see with my function. Also, the parameters must be defined inside of the parentheses. As you can see, these are all parameters. Again, these are optional, but we did use them for this example, so they must always be inside of the parentheses. And if you have more than one, you have to separate them with commas. And the return value must be defined after the arrow. As you can see, the return value we want is a string, and that's defined after the arrow here, pointing to the function that we want to return, or the value we want to return, which is the string. If the function returns a string, that's how, or value, that's how we have to do it. Now, lastly, the function body must be indented with 4 spaces or tabs to indicate that it is part of the function. So as you can see, this is our function, and then the rest of the code is indented 4 times, letting us know that this is what our function is actually defining, or this is the code that is defining. Now let's look at a function that doesn't take any parameters and doesn't return any value. So let's move down. You can see here we have define our keyword print high 2 times. We don't have any parameters and we don't have any return values. But we do have doc strings, again, which are optional, and it lets us know that this function prints high 2 times. So you can see we have print high and print high. We can call this function like this. Print high 2 times is the name of our function. It's how we call it without the definition keyword, and it's not indented. So this is how we actually call this function. And when we call this function, it will print out high 2 times to our terminal, just the way it's printed. Now notice that we didn't define any parameters or return any values for the function, so it doesn't take any parameters and it doesn't return any values. Let's move down a little bit. Now functions are incredibly useful for when we have very complex code or chunks of code that we want to reuse in our small contracts. And this is because we don't have to define this over and over again. Once it's defined once, it's defined and it's done. So all we have to do to call it is print out the name of the function wherever we want in our code to print high 2 times. It'll print out high 2 times because we're calling it with the function's name. Now all we have to do is define the function once, like I just said, and then we can call it as many times as we want without having to rewrite the function every time we want to use it. That's basically how we use functions or slash methods, but again, we're going to use the function word for this example, so that's what we use. Tomorrow we're going to come back and I'm going to show you how we can actually use functions for math operations inside of our Python and Viper smart contracts. But of course, I'll keep you posted every step of the way when we come back tomorrow. But for now, this is the Python Papi. You guys stay Gucci.